Hey guys, it's Tahira, and today I'm gonna be doing another books I've read recently video. So the last one I did was a couple of months ago, I think end of February I would like to say. So this one is more of the books I read in March and April, and I read 7 books in the past 2 months. I'm gonna be talking about those today. I have read a lot of these books in different like vlogs and such throughout the past couple of months. So if you want to hear my more like real-time thoughts of the books that I'm reading that I'm talking about today, then I would definitely check out some of those, and I'll link those down below as well. But I thought I'd quickly go through all the books that I read, just in case you haven't seen or you're on my channel for the first time. Just in case you haven't seen those videos, though I will say you should definitely check them out. But in case you haven't, I will also be talking about them today. So yeah, the first book that I'm going to be talking about is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I read this for a reading the most like hyped 2023 books video, where I was reading like 2023's most hyped books. I think that was pretty self-explanatory. And I really wanted to see if they were worth the hype, in my opinion. Spoiler alert, a lot of them weren't. This one I ended up giving it 3 stars, which is really disappointing because this one was super hyped up last year and I really wanted to love it. This one was definitely a super rushed book in my opinion in terms of the romance. And honestly I would say it's one of my most disappointing books of the year because of just the amount of hype that it had. But in terms of the romance, I will say that there was just so much that happened within this book. Even though this is a duology, I feel like there was so much that happened that could have been spread out a little bit more into two of the books because it's duology. But we literally went from these 2 characters, Iris and Roman, are like rivals, kind of, not really, at this newspaper. And then throughout the rest of the book, I have no idea if this is a spoiler, I'm so sorry, I might be spoiling this book, so just beware. But it goes literally from them being like rivals to literally them getting married within the same like 300-page book. Like that's not even a long book for a fantasy especially, and you're telling me you go from rivals to getting married within those pages? Like that just doesn't make sense. The plot was almost non-existent. It focused a lot more on Iris and Roman's like relationship rather than this war that was going around them, even though the war was supposedly like super deadly and they were like on the front lines. But it was never truly like an issue, and I never really felt high stakes for any part of the book either. So yeah, I liked the writing style, but the way that the story was executed was just a little bit lacking in my opinion. And I think I will still read the sequel just to see how the story ends, but overall this was a super disappointing read for me. Then I read another book for this video, which was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which is even more of a disappointing read. I gave this 2.575 stars, which I'm also so sad about. I know that a lot of people talk about how the main character is unlikable and she's sort of written to be super unlikable, and I think the author actually did a really good job of making her that way, because I was really annoyed with the way she was acting, and I think that was the whole point. So I would give like props to the author for doing that, because she really did make her super unlikable. My main issue with the book is that it felt like very juvenile in the issues that it was talking about. Basically this book follows, I've realized I'm not giving you the synopses, but Yellowface follows this author, this girl named June. Is that her name? And she's best friends with this girl named Athena, who's this like best-selling author. Everyone loves her work. And one day Athena like dies, and June sees a manuscript in her apartment because she's with her when she dies. So she sees the manuscript and she takes it and kind of like fixes it up and publishes it as her own, and she gets so much like critical acclaim for it because Athena wrote it, who's like this big like critically acclaimed author, but June released it under a like racially ambiguous name and kind of just put it out as her own, and obviously everyone loved it because it was actually Athena's work, which she was a loved author. So then June kind of had the experience of what it's like to be the type of author that she's always wanted to be, which is like super popular, getting a ton of praise over her work. And she was always the kind of author that was sort of in the background, that didn't get a ton of attention. So she was really like basking in this like new popularity that she had just gained. And a lot of the book was about this like discussion about discourse on the internet, because there was a lot of discourse obviously around like her publishing it, because like as people caught on to like what was going on, there was so much like discussions going on around the internet, and it was kind of about how a lot of it was about big Twitter, and it felt like I mentioned this in my, a lot of these are mentioned in my video too, but basically there's a lot of times where the author, like R.F. Kuang, the author of the book, is like stopping in the middle of the story to explain to us, the reader, or like, I guess it's because the main character is talking to us and explaining different concepts that are within book Twitter or like the book internet space online. So like, I don't even remember if this was one of them, but it'll be like blah 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 TBR, and then it'll be like, oh, a TBR is blah 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 blah. So it'll be kind of explaining what different book concepts is, which, like I said in my video, it's, of course, for people that don't know, it's good, but for me it just felt really annoying and it was taking me out of the story. And then the ending sort of left, or led to nothing, because people were just going at her for like publishing this book, and she kind of just accepted it and wrote like, made a story out of it. And I guess it was kind of like, oh, the cycle's gonna continue, but I don't know, it just felt like all of this shit was happening and it ended up leading to like no conclusion. The next book that I read was a video where I was reading some booktuber recommendations. So I read The Last Table of the Flower Bride from Sarah Then H's recommendation, and I gave this 2.5 stars. I will not talk too much about this book because honestly I can't even like really remember, but like basically I don't think Roshni Chokshi's writing is for me, because she is very like purple prose and flowery writing, very descriptive, but it just doesn't mesh well with me. Like, I like beautiful writing, but just the way her writing is, it sort of really bogs down the plot, which was my experience with this book. It has always been my experience with her books, for the most part, except for The Gilded Wolves. I feel like that was when I enjoyed a little bit more, but just overall I just don't mesh well with her writing style. And overall it was a good story, and like I like the atmosphere of the story and the world, but I feel like the story just didn't land well with me. Then I read another book for the booktube recommendations, and that was from Rachel from Raven Haired Reader, and she recommended Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and he's the author of The Martian, so I had heard a lot about him and ended up giving this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, which I'm so happy about, because obviously, as you can see, I've had sort of a bad track record with my books recently. Many times I've said before, I'm truly in my hater era. I was also hesitant going into this book because it was like sci-fi, and I never read like literally the last time I read sci-fi was Red Rising in middle school, and I haven't read sci-fi like since then. So I was really hesitant going into this book, but I am so glad I ended up really loving it. It was overall a really heartwarming story and wholesome, which I wasn't expecting, because the way that the story, so what this book is about this man who wakes up from a coma, and he's on a spaceship, and he sort of has to figure out what he's doing there and what his mission is and what he has to do. And I don't really want to give too much away other than that, because that is truly the premise of the book, and you kind of go along with his journey, as he's also, because he's just woken up, so he doesn't know what's going on. So it's really, I think, the best to just go in and kind of go along the journey with him as he's figuring things out. I loved the dynamic. There is an alien that comes in this book named Rocky, and I loved Rocky so much. He deserves the entire world, and I loved him and the main character Ryland's relationship, even though it's a little bit out there, because like obviously you wouldn't be able to communicate as easily as they did, but overall I just really loved their like friendship dynamic. It was so cute. Another thing was that some of the sci-fi parts were a little bit textbooky. Like, there was a lot of science talk going on, a lot of math talk sometimes. So if you're not super into that kind of stuff, I would don't read this book. But overall I feel like it didn't detract from the story at all. Even though I did not understand what I was reading, I was still enjoying it, and it was still like fun to kind of just learn new things as you're reading it. The next book that I read was for a book club, because I've talked about this before. I have sort of joined Literally Dead Book Club by Books and Lala, and for, I believe, March, they were reading Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Cusantanto. I ended up giving this 3.5 to 4 stars. I actually really enjoyed this, and I had a lot of fun reading it. So this one follows a woman named Vera Wong, and she runs a tea house in San Francisco, and one day she wakes up and she sees a dead man, in her tea house, just laying there. And so she kind of takes it upon herself to figure out what happened and who murdered this random man that's in her house. It's a cozy mystery, so there's definitely a lot of wild antics going on, but I thought it was a really fun concept with a very interesting main character that I haven't really read a character like that before in a book. So that was really fun. I will say she was a little bit annoying at times, just because I know that she was based on what a lot of like older, because she is an Asian woman, so a lot of older Asian women and their kind of mentality. But I don't know, just to me as like a Gen Z like American, I don't know, it just, I could tell, like I was kind of feeling like the other characters in the book where it's like she's a little bit overbearing at times, but it's like in the best way. And ultimately this is a found family story and not really a murder story, which is like kind of in the background, but overall it's about the kind of group of people that come together as she's trying to figure out the murder, and I think that's like the best part of the book. One of the discussions that I really loved about this book is that there's a lot of talk and discussions about like what it's like to grow up with immigrant parents and what it's like to grow up with like all these expectations that they have on you, because like a lot of times immigrant parents come from a like a sort of third world country almost, or like a country that's like doing worse off. So when they come here, they kind of come with this American dream, and they have like, they work really hard for their kids, but then they also have all these expectations for their kids to do, like their expectations of what it means for them to do super well. So I thought that there were a lot of really great discussions about what it's like to kind of grow up with that and kind of deal with these expectations as you're also trying to find your own place in the world. A lot of people talked about how the ending was super like predictable, but honestly it wasn't predictable for me at all. I did not predict the ending or the twist or like the reveal or anything at all, and I was very confused when it happened. But I can kind of like, after seeing a lot of other people's reviews, I can kind of see like how it was a little bit predictable, but to me as someone who doesn't read a lot of mysteries, I didn't see it coming, so I thought that was pretty good. Like I don't know, I had a fun time with it. And then the only other thing that I had an issue with was that one of the romance between two of the characters felt a little bit rushed, and I honestly thought they only got together, or like the author only put them together because Vera Wong, the main character, was like, oh, you guys would be good together, and then boom, they kind of just develop feelings for each other. I don't know, it just felt kind of weird with that dynamic. But overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely pick up her other books. I already have her Dial A for Auntie's book that I got last year that I haven't read yet, but now I'm even more excited based on like her writing style and her like fun cozy mysteries. I'm like way more excited for that one now. Then I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, I believe is the author, and I read this because I don't know, I put it on hold at the library because a lot of people had been talking about it last year and saying a lot of really great things, and ended up giving this like 3.5 stars. So I didn't like love it as much as everyone else who was like giving it 5 stars. This one is a kind of cozy fantasy following this woman who I completely forgot her name. Emily, well, her name is Emily Wilde. Her name is literally in the title. Emily Wilde is this like researcher who researches fairies, and she's kind of compiling an encyclopedia about them. So she goes up to this like northern kind of Nordic inspired place where she's trying to research their like fairies. Her rival is Wendell, who's like works at her university, and he also comes, and they kind of like start working together, I guess. I don't know, it started out interesting, but then it got really boring, honestly, because it is a cozy fantasy. There's not a bunch of stakes. So I don't know, it just felt like there was the same thing kept happening over and over again. I enjoyed the cozy vibes as it was a cozy fantasy, but in general I just don't think cozy fantasies are for me, because I definitely, as I have kind of learned after this book, that this was my first cozy like fantasy book, I definitely prefer some sort of stakes, and there was almost like no stakes in this book, or very low stakes. So I definitely prefer like high stakes fantasies. It just ups the tension for me, and I think it just really strengthens relationships between characters too. Things got a little bit more like interesting towards the end, but I don't know, it just overall it was just kind of boring, and the ending was super abrupt. I don't know, it was just a little bit weird for that aspect. But I actually really liked Wendell a lot more than Emily. I feel like he had a little bit more of a distinct personality, and if I could tell you anything about Emily, I couldn't tell you anything. I feel like I know Wendell so much more than Emily, and I really enjoyed his personality. And then the last book I'm going to be talking about is the book that I read for my scavenger hunt video, which I read before She Ignites, which I gave 2 stars. So back to my hater era. This one I will not talk about that much because I really just posted this video, but I found it slow paced and boring. It was pitched to be dragons, but there was almost no dragons. And it was just kind of a slow story in this small confined space, even though I feel like so much could have been done with the world, especially with the dragons. And I know this is like a trilogy, I think, at least more than two. I think there's like 3 books, but I have literally no desire to continue with the series. Like, at least with Divine Rivals, I sort of have an interest in seeing the duology through, but for this one I just have absolutely no interest in continuing, and I honestly couldn't care less about this book or the series. So yeah, that is it for all the books that I read in the past 2 months. 7 books I feel like is pretty standard for me. I have read at this point 20 books in the year, and I'm 4 books ahead of schedule, so I'm actually feel like I'm doing pretty well, considering that the past few years I've always been like 8 books behind. So I feel like I'm doing really well this year, not only on my like reading game, but also in my like making content game, and I've been really enjoying it. But yeah, let me know down below if you've read any of these books, as of course I would love to know. But that is it for this video. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.